The rain came down in sheets, hammering the Chicago pavement like it had a grudge against the city. Elliot stood under the awning of a diner, his breath visible in the chilly air. Clutching a crumpled invitation to a high school reunion he wasn't sure he wanted to attend. Then Jamie appeared, his best friend, his anchor, his complication, grinning like he'd just won the lottery and offering to play the role of Elliot's wife to save him from small-town judgment. What started as a reckless joke to dodge old classmates' pitying stares spiraled into something else entirely. Jamie, with his quick wit and disarming charm, slipped into the role of Eleanor so seamlessly that even Elliot began to blur the lines between pretense and truth. By the end of the night, under the glow of fairy lights and the weight of shared secrets, Elliot realized the act might not be an act at all, not for him, and maybe not for Jamie either. Elliot's phone buzzed in his pocket, the third time in 10 minutes. He ignored it, staring at the neon sign flickering above the diner, Maggie's All Night Eats. The reunion invitation burned a hole in his jacket, a relic from a life he'd left behind in rural Illinois. 10 years ago, he'd been the quiet kid who never quite fit in, the one who'd fled to Chicago the second he could. Now, at 28, he was a graphic designer with a decent apartment and a life that felt incomplete. The reunion was a chance to prove he'd made it. But the thought of facing his old classmates married, successful, smug made his stomach churn. "Elliot, you look like you're about to puke." Jamie's voice cut through the rain's rhythm. He emerged from the crowd, his scarf a splash of color against the gray evening, his dark eyes glinting with mischief. "What's the deal? You've been dodging my texts." Elliot held up the invitation, the gold-embossed letters smudged from his nervous grip. "This, my high school reunion. They're expecting me to show up with a wife, kids, the whole American dream package. I can't go alone. Jamie, they'll eat me alive." Jamie snatched the paper, scanning it with a smirk. "Oh, this is gold. The class of 15. Huh. Bet they're all balding and miserable." He paused, his grin widening. "You need a +1. Someone to dazzle them. Make them jealous. Lucky for you, I'm free Saturday night." "You're not serious," Elliot said, though his heart gave a traitorous lurch. Jamie had been his best friend since college, the one who dragged him out of his shell with late-night talks and impulsive adventures. But Jamie was also Jamie. Charismatic, unpredictable, and dangerously good at getting under Elliot's skin. "Dead serious," Jamie replied, leaning closer. The rain dripped from the awning, framing his face in a soft halo. "I'll be your wife. Call me Eleanor. I'll wear a dress, charm the socks off your old bullies, and make you look like the luckiest guy in the room." Elliot laughed, a nervous edge to it. "You can't pull that off." "Wanna bet?" Jamie's eyes sparkled with challenge. "I've got a wig, a killer wardrobe, and enough confidence to fool God himself. Come on, Elliot. Let's give them a show." Against his better judgment, Elliot nodded. It was a terrible idea, but Jamie had a way of making terrible ideas feel like destiny. By the time they ducked into the diner to plan, Elliot's anxiety had morphed into something else, something warm and reckless, like the first spark of a fire he wasn't sure he could control. The next 2 days were a whirlwind. Jamie threw himself into the role of Eleanor with alarming enthusiasm, raiding thrift stores for the perfect dress and practicing a lilting, feminine voice that made Elliot's head spin. They rehearsed their story, Elliot and Eleanor, married 3 years, met at a design conference in Chicago. "No kids yet, but we're thinking about it," Jamie would say with a wink, rehearsing in front of Elliot's bathroom mirror. "You're enjoying this too much," Elliot said Friday night, watching Jamie adjust a auburn wig. They were in Elliot's cramped apartment, surrounded by takeout containers and fabric swatches. Jamie's confidence was magnetic, but it also stirred something uneasy in Elliot, a feeling he'd buried years ago. Back when he first realized his best friend was more than just a friend. Gotta commit to the bit, Jamie replied, spinning to face him. The dress, a deep emerald green, hugged his frame in a way that was distractingly elegant. What do you think? Do I pass? Elliot swallowed hard. You look convincing. Convincing. Jamie stepped closer, his voice dropping to a teasing whisper. Come on, Elliot. Tell me I'm gorgeous. You're ridiculous, Elliot muttered, his cheeks burning. But he couldn't look away. Jamie's eyes held his, playful but searching, like he was waiting for something Elliot wasn't ready to say. The moment broke when Jamie's phone chimed. Showtime's tomorrow, he said, checking the screen. Get some sleep, husband. You'll need it to keep up with me. Elliot lay awake that night, the word husband echoing in his mind. He told himself it was just a game, a performance to survive the reunion. But the way his heart raced when Jamie smiled, the way his thoughts kept drifting to what might happen after the night was over, it felt like more. It felt like a truth he'd been running from for years. Saturday arrived, gray and crisp, the kind of autumn day that made Chicago feel alive. The reunion was held at a banquet hall in the suburbs, a 2-hour drive from the city. Elliot gripped the steering wheel, his knuckles white, while Jamie, now Eleanor, sat in the passenger seat, applying lip gloss with the precision of a surgeon. Relax, Jamie said, catching his eye. We've got this. I'm the perfect wife, and you're the adoring husband who can't believe his luck. You're too good at this, Elliot said, half joking. It's freaking me out. Jamie laughed, a sound that filled the car with warmth. Good. That means I'm doing my job. The banquet hall was a sea of familiar faces, older and stranger than Elliot remembered. His old classmates milled about, sipping cheap wine and exchanging stories of mortgages and kids. The air buzzed with judgment, the kind that had driven Elliot away a decade ago. He felt their eyes on him, sizing him up, until Jamie slipped his arm through Elliot's, his touch steady and grounding. Ready, love, Jamie whispered, his voice pitched higher as Eleanor. He flashed a dazzling smile at the room, and Elliot's nerves eased, replaced by a flicker of pride. Jamie was a force of nature, and for tonight, he was his. They navigated the crowd, Jamie spinning tales of their fictional life with effortless charm. He laughed at the right moments, touched Elliot's arm with just enough affection to sell the lie. Old bullies who'd once mocked Elliot for being different now clapped him on the back, envious of his poised, radiant wife. For the first time, Elliot felt like he belonged. But as the night wore on, the lines blurred. Jamie's hand lingered on Elliot's, his glances softer, more intentional. During a slow dance, their bodies pressed close, Jamie's breath warm against Elliot's ear. You're doing great, he murmured, but his voice held a weight that wasn't part of the act. Elliot's heart pounded. This wasn't just a performance anymore. It was a confession, unspoken but undeniable, and he wasn't sure either of them could walk away from it unchanged. The banquet hall glowed with strings of fairy lights, casting a warm haze over the dance floor. Elliot and Jamie swayed to a soft jazz tune, their movements careful but charged, like they were balancing on the edge of something fragile. Jamie's hand rested lightly on Elliot's shoulder, his fingers brushing the collar of Elliot's shirt, and every touch felt like a question neither of them dared to answer. You're not half bad at this, Jamie said, his voice low, still tinged with Eleanor's lilt but carrying something deeper. His eyes locked onto Elliot's, and for a moment, the chatter of the reunion faded, leaving just the two of them in a bubble of music and heat. Elliot forced a smile, his throat tight. You're stealing the show, as usual. But his mind was racing. The way Jamie moved, the way he leaned in just a fraction too close, it was unraveling him. He'd spent years convincing himself his feelings for Jamie were just a phase, a college crush he'd outgrown. Now, with Jamie's breath warm against his cheek, those feelings roared back, undeniable and terrifying. The song ended, and Jamie stepped back, breaking the spell. "Come on," he said, tugging Elliot toward the bar. "Let's get a drink before your old math teacher tries to quiz me on our wedding vows." Elliot laughed, grateful for the distraction, but his chest ached with the weight of what he wasn't saying. They grabbed 2 glasses of wine and found a quiet corner, away from the crowd's prying eyes. Jamie sipped his drink, his wig slightly askew from dancing, and Elliot couldn't help but notice how human he looked, flawed. Beautiful. Real. "So," Jamie said, leaning back against the wall, "how am I doing as your wife?" "Too well," Elliot admitted, the words slipping out before he could stop them. "You're making it hard to remember this is fake." Jamie's smile faltered, just for a second, and something flickered in his eye, surprise. "Maybe. Or hope." "Good," he said softly. "Maybe I don't want you to forget." The air between them thickened, charged with unspoken truths. Elliot opened his mouth to respond, but a voice interrupted, a former classmate, Greg, who'd always had a knack for ruining moments. "Elliot, man, you hit the jackpot with this one," Greg said, clapping Elliot on the shoulder and eyeing Jamie with a grin. "Eleanor, right. How'd a nerd like him snag someone like you?" Jamie slipped back into character effortlessly, his smile bright and sharp. "Oh, you know, he's got hidden depths. Took me by surprise, too." He winked at Elliot, but there was a tension in his posture now, like he was bracing for something. Greg lingered, asking nosy questions about their marriage, and Jamie handled each one with charm and deflection. But Elliot could see the strain in his friend's eyes, the effort it took to keep up the act. When Greg finally wandered off, Jamie downed the rest of his wine in one gulp. "You okay?" Elliot asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Jamie nodded, but his smile didn't reach his eyes. "Just intense. You know, playing a role like T-Sit makes you think about what you're hiding from." Elliot's heart skipped. "What are you hiding from, Jamie?" For a moment, Jamie looked like he might answer, might lay bare whatever was simmering beneath the surface. But then he laughed, light and forced, and stood up. "Come on, husband. We've got more people to impress." The rest of the evening passed in a blur of small talk and forced smiles. Jamie was flawless as Eleanor, weaving stories that made their fake life sound like a fairy tale. But every time their eyes met, Elliot felt the weight of that unspoken moment, the question neither of them was brave enough to ask. As the night wound down, the crowd thinned, and the fairy lights seemed to glow brighter, casting long shadows across the room. Elliot and Jamie stepped outside to catch their breath, the cool night air a sharp contrast to the stuffy hall. The parking lot was quiet, save for the distant hum of traffic and the soft patter of lingering rain. Jamie leaned against the car, his wig now tucked into his bag, his face bare and vulnerable under the streetlights. "We pulled it off," he said, his voice quieter than usual. "You're officially the coolest guy at the reunion." Elliot managed a smile, but his mind was elsewhere. "Jamie, back there, when you said you didn't want me to forget, what did you mean?" Jamie froze, his eyes searching Elliot's face. For the first time all night, he looked unsure, like he was standing on the edge of a cliff. "Elliot, His words were cut off by the sudden blare of a car horn. A group of classmates stumbled out of the hall, laughing and drunk, calling for them to join one last toast. Jamie's expression shuddered, and he slipped back into his easy grin. "Later. Okay. Let's not ruin a good night." Elliot nodded, but the moment clung to him like damp clothes, heavy and inescapable. As they drove back to the city, the silence between them was different, not tense, but full of things unsaid. Elliot glanced at Jamie, his profile sharp against the passing lights, and wondered how long they could keep pretending. The Chicago skyline glittered through the car window, a mosaic of light and steel that felt both familiar and distant. Elliot drove in silence, his hands tight on the wheel, while Jamie stared out at the city, his fingers tapping restlessly against the armrest. The reunion had been a success. They'd fooled everyone, played their parts to perfection, but the weight of their performance lingered, heavy as the rain-soaked air. Elliot stole a glance at Jamie, whose face was half lit by the glow of passing streetlights. Without the wig and makeup, he was just Jamie against sharp cheekbones, tousled hair, and a quiet intensity that made Elliot's chest ache. The question from the parking lot still hung between them, unanswered, and Elliot wasn't sure he had the courage to bring it up again. "You were incredible tonight," Elliot said finally, his voice breaking the silence. "I mean it. You made me look like I had my life together." Jamie's lips curved into a small smile, but his eyes stayed fixed on the window. "That's what best friends are for, right? Making you look good when you're falling apart." Elliot's grip on the wheel tightened. "I'm not falling apart." "Aren't you?" Jamie turned to face him, his voice soft but pointed. "You've been freaking out about this reunion for weeks. Like showing up alone would have been some kind of failure. Why do you care so much what those people think?" Elliot opened his mouth, then closed it. He didn't have an answer, not a good one. Anyway, the truth was, he'd spent years running from the kid he'd been, the one who never fit in, who hid his feelings behind a shy smile. The reunion was supposed to be his victory lap, proof he'd escaped. But standing in that banquet hall, even with Jamie by his side, he'd felt like that kid again. "I don't know," he admitted. "I just wanted to feel like I belonged somewhere. For once." Jamie's expression softened, and he reached out, resting a hand on Elliot's arm. "You belong with me, idiot. Always have." The words hit like a punch, stealing Elliot's breath. He pulled into his apartment's parking lot, the engine idling as he tried to process what Jamie had just said. It wasn't the first time Jamie had thrown out something like that, casual, teasing, but laced with something deeper. But tonight, after hours of playing husband and wife, it felt different. It felt real. "Jamie," Elliot started, his voice shaky. "What are we doing here? This whole night it's messing with my head." Jamie's hand lingered on his arm, warm and steady. "Maybe it's supposed to." Before Elliot could respond, Jamie unbuckled his seatbelt and leaned closer, his face inches away. The air in the car felt charged, like the moment before a storm breaks. Elliot's heart pounded, every nerve screaming at him to close the distance, to finally say what he'd been holding back for years. But fear, sharp and familiar, clamped down on his chest. "We should go inside," Elliot said, pulling back. "It's late." Jamie's eyes flickered with something disappointment. "Maybe," but he nodded. "Yeah, sure." Inside Elliot's apartment, the tension followed them, curling into the corners of the small space. Jamie kicked off his shoes and flopped onto the couch, his scarf dangling over the armrest. "So," he said, his tone lighter now, "think we'll get an Oscar for ethics? Or are we just terrible people for lying to everyone?" Elliot laughed, grateful for the shift. "Probably terrible. But you were so convincing. I almost believed we were married." Jamie grinned, but there was an edge to it. "Maybe I'm just that good. Or maybe," he trailed off, his gaze dropping to the floor. Elliot sat beside him, the couch creaking under their weight. "Maybe what?" For a moment, Jamie didn't answer. He picked at a loose thread on his sleeve, his usual confidence replaced by something raw and uncertain. "Maybe I liked it a little too much," he said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. "Playing your wife. Being that close to you." Elliot's breath caught. He'd spent so long burying his feelings, convincing himself they were one-sided. That hearing Jamie say this felt like the ground shifting beneath him. Jamie. His phone buzzed, cutting through the moment like a knife. It was a text from his sister, Maya, asking how the reunion went. Elliot stared at the screen, his heart still racing from Jamie's words. He wanted to ignore it, to dive back into the conversation. But the interruption gave him a chance to retreat from the edge of something he wasn't sure he was ready for. "We should get some sleep," he said, standing up. "Big day tomorrow." Jamie's jaw tightened, but he nodded. "Yeah, big day." They set up the couch for Jamie to sleep on, a routine they'd done 100 times before. But as Elliot lay in his bed, staring at the ceiling, he couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted irreversibly. Jamie's confession, brief as it was, had cracked open a door Elliot had kept locked for years. And now, he wasn't sure he could close it again. Morning light filtered through Elliot's apartment, painting the living room in soft golds and pinks. He woke to the smell of coffee and the sound of Jamie humming in the kitchen, a familiar scene that felt strangely new after last night. Elliot lay still for a moment, his mind replaying Jamie's words. "Maybe I liked it a little too much." The memory sent a shiver through him, equal parts thrill and terror. He found Jamie at the counter, pouring coffee into mismatched mugs. Without the wig and dress, Jamie was back to his usual self-messy hair, faded band tee, and a grin that could light up a room. But there was a tension in his shoulders, a carefulness in the way he moved, like he was waiting for Elliot to make the next move. "Morning, husband," Jamie said, sliding a mug toward him. His tone was playful, but his eyes were cautious, searching Elliot's face for a reaction. Elliot took the coffee, his fingers brushing Jamie's for a split second. "Morning," he replied, his voice rough from sleep and something he wasn't ready to name. "Sleep okay?" "Like a rock," Jamie lied, and Elliot knew it was a lie because he'd heard Jamie tossing and turning on the couch half the night. They sipped their coffee in silence, the weight of last night's almost confession hanging between them. "We should talk," Elliot said finally, setting his mug down. His heart was pounding, but he couldn't keep dodging this. Not after everything. Jamie's expression flickered hope, fear, something in between. "Yeah, we should." He leaned against the counter, his fingers drumming a nervous rhythm. "Look, Elliot, last night, I didn't mean to freak you out. I just playing Eleanor. Being that close to you. It felt right. More right than it should have." Elliot's throat tightened. He wanted to say it felt right for him too, that the lines between pretend and real had blurred so much he couldn't see them anymore. But the word stuck, tangled in years of fear and self-doubt. Instead, he said, "You don't have to explain. It was just a role, right?" Jamie's face fell, just for a moment, before he masked it with a smile. "Right. Just a role." He pushed off the counter, grabbing his scarf. "I should head out. Got a shift at the bookstore later." "Jamie." "Wait," Elliot started, but his phone rang, shrill and insistent. It was his boss, probably calling about the project deadline looming next week. He hesitated, torn between answering and chasing after Jamie, who was already halfway to the door. "I'll catch you later," Jamie said, his voice too casual, too final. And then he was gone, leaving Elliot alone with his coffee and a sinking feeling in his chest. The day dragged on, a blur of emails and sketches for a client's ad campaign. Elliot tried to focus, but his thoughts kept drifting to Jamiedo the way he'd looked under the fairy lights, to the words he'd left unsaid. By afternoon, he couldn't take it anymore. He grabbed his jacket and headed to the bookstore where Jamie worked, a cozy shop in Wicker Park stacked with dog-eared paperbacks and vinyl records. Jamie was behind the counter, ringing up a customer, his smile professional but distant. When he saw Elliot, his expression shifted surprise. Then something guarded. "Hey," he said, finishing with the customer. "What's up?" "I didn't like how we left things," Elliot said, his voice low. The shop was quiet, save for the soft hum of a record player in the corner. "Can we talk? For real this time?" Jamie hesitated, then nodded. "Give me 10 minutes. My break's coming up." They ended up at a park nearby, sitting on a bench under a canopy of red and gold leaves. The air was crisp, the city alive with the hum of traffic and distant laughter. Elliot's hands were stuffed in his pockets, his nerves fraying as he searched for the right words. "I'm sorry about this morning," he said finally. "I didn't mean to shut you down. I got scared." Jamie looked at him, his eyes soft but piercing. "Scared of what, Elliot?" "Of this," Elliot said, gesturing between them. "Of us. Of what it means if we're not just pretending anymore." Jamie's breath hitched, and for a moment, he looked as vulnerable as Elliot felt. "You think I'm not scared too? I've been your best friend for years, Elliot. I know what's at stake. But last night, playing your wife, it wasn't just a game for me. It felt like I was finally being honest about how I feel." Elliot's heart stopped. "How you feel?" Jamie laughed, a shaky sound. "Come on, man. You really gonna make me say it?" He ran a hand through his hair, his voice dropping. "I'm in love with you, Elliot. Have been for a while. I just didn't know how to tell you without screwing everything up." The words hit like a tidal wave, washing away years of doubt and denial. Elliot stared at Jamie, his best friend, his maybe something more, and felt the world tilt. He wanted to say it back, to tell Jamie he felt the same, but the fear was still there, clawing at him. "I need time," he said instead, hating how weak it sounded. "I don't know what I'm doing, Jamie. I don't want to mess this up." Jamie's smile was small, bittersweet. "Take all the time you need. I'm not going anywhere." But as they walked back to the bookstore, Elliot couldn't shake the feeling that time was the one thing they didn't have. The next week was a tightrope walk. Elliot threw himself into work, sketching logos and tweaking designs until his eyes burned. But Jamie's confession was a constant hum in the back of his mind. "I'm in love with you." The words were a gift and a burden, reshaping every memory of their friendship into something new, something terrifyingly possible. They still texted, still met for coffee, but there was a new distance between them, a carefulness that hadn't been there before. Jamie was giving him space, just like he'd promised, but Elliot hated it. He missed the easy banter, the way Jamie could make him laugh even on his worst days. He missed them. One evening, Elliot found himself at Maggie's Diner, the same place where this had all started. The neon sign buzzed above him, casting a familiar glow over the rain-slicked street. He hadn't planned to come here, but his feet had carried him anyway, like they knew he needed to face this. He was halfway through a burger when Jamie walked in, his scarf loose around his neck, his hair damp from the drizzle outside. "Fancy meeting you here," Jamie said, sliding into the booth across from him. His smile was tentative, like he wasn't sure he was welcome. "Couldn't stay away," Elliot said, pushing his plate toward Jamie. "Want some fries?" Jamie grabbed one, but his eyes were on Elliot, searching. "You've been quiet lately. Everything okay?" Elliot took a deep breath, his heart hammering. He'd spent days rehearsing this moment, but now that it was here, the words felt clumsy, inadequate. "I've been thinking about what you said." Jamie's expression didn't change, but his fingers tightened around the fry. Yeah. Elliot leaned forward, his voice low. "I'm scared, Jamie. Scared of messing this up, of losing you. But I'm also scared of not trying. Because I think I'm in love with you too." The words hung in the air, raw and unguarded. Jamie's eyes widened, a flicker of hope breaking through his careful mask. You think? Elliot laughed. A shaky sound. I know. I've known for a while. I didn't want to admit it. I didn't want to ruin what we have. Jamie reached across the table, his hand covering Elliot's. His touch was warm, steady, like an anchor in a storm. You're not going to ruin anything, he said softly. Not with me. For a moment, they just sat there, hands intertwined, the diner's hum fading into the background. It wasn't a grand gesture or a cinematic kiss, it was quiet, real, and more powerful than anything Elliot could have imagined. But reality crept in, as it always did. Jamie's phone buzzed, a reminder of his evening shift. He groaned, pulling his hand back. I gotta go. But we're not done with this. Okay. Elliot nodded, his chest lighter than it had been in weeks. Okay. As Jamie left, Elliot stayed at the diner, staring at the empty booth. For the first time, he let himself imagine a future where they weren't just friends, where they were more. It was terrifying, but it was also exhilarating, like stepping into a new city with no map, but all the time in the world. Over the next few days, they fell into a new rhythm. They talked more, not just about the confession, but about everything: fears, dreams, the messy details of who they were. Elliot learned things about Jamie he'd never known, how he'd come out to his family at 16 and been met with silence, how he'd built his confidence like armor to protect himself. Jamie learned about Elliot's quiet struggles, the way he'd always felt like an outsider, even in his own life. One night, they ended up at a rooftop bar in Logan Square, the city sprawling beneath them like a sea of stars. Jamie leaned against the railing, his scarf fluttering in the breeze, and Elliot couldn't help but think he looked like he belonged there, like he was part of the city's heartbeat. You ever think about what happens next? Jamie asked, his voice soft against the hum of the crowd. All the time, Elliot admitted. But I'm starting to think it's not about knowing. It's about being brave enough to find out. Jamie turned to him, his smile slow and warm. You're braver than you think, Elliot. And in that moment, under the Chicago sky, Elliot believed him. The weeks that followed felt like a new chapter, one Elliot hadn't dared to write until now. He and Jamie were no longer just friends, but they weren't quite something else either, not yet. They were navigating uncharted territory, each step tentative but thrilling, like explorers mapping a land they'd only dreamed of. They spent evenings together, cooking dinner in Elliot's tiny kitchen or wandering Chicago's streets, chasing the last of the autumn light. Every touch, every glance carried new weight, and Elliot found himself noticing things he'd overlooked before, the way Jamie's laugh crinkled his eyes, the way his voice softened when he said Elliot's name. But the world wasn't as simple as their bubble. One Saturday, they were at a coffee shop in Andersonville when a familiar face appeared: Greg, from the reunion, his grin as smug as ever. He spotted them and sauntered over, his eyes narrowing as he took in Jamie's lack of a wig or dress. Well, Greg said, leaning against their table. Elliot, where's your lovely wife? Don't tell me you're stepping out on her already. Elliot's stomach dropped. Jamie tensed beside him, his smile tight. Eleanor's taking a day off, Jamie said, his voice light but edged with steel. What's it to you? Greg laughed, oblivious to the tension. Just curious. Man, you two were the talk of the reunion. Gotta say, I didn't expect to see you here with. Who's this? Elliot's heart raced. He could feel Jamie's eyes on him, waiting for him to take the lead. This was the moment to own the truth or hide behind the lie. He took a breath, his hand finding Jamie's under the table. This is Jamie, he said, his voice steady despite the nerves. My best friend. And, more than that. Greg's grin faltered, confusion flickering across his face. Wait. What? I thought. You thought wrong. Jamie cut in, his tone sharp but calm. People are complicated. Greg. Catch up. Greg mumbled something and wandered off, leaving Elliot and Jamie in a silence that felt both heavy and liberating. Jamie squeezed Elliot's hand, his smile small but proud. That was brave, he said. Felt like throwing up, Elliot admitted. But he was smiling too. The encounter with Greg was a wake-up call. The world outside their bubble wasn't always kind, and owning their truth meant facing judgment, questions, maybe even rejection. But it also meant freedom, the kind Elliot had spent years chasing without knowing it. That night, they ended up at Jamie's apartment, a cozy loft filled with books and half-finished art projects. They sat on the floor, sharing a bottle of wine. The city's hum a soft backdrop. Jamie leaned against Elliot, his head resting on his shoulder. And for the first time, Elliot didn't pull away. I'm proud of you, Jamie said, his voice barely above a whisper. For what you did today. For being you. Elliot's throat tightened. I'm still figuring out who that is. But I know I want you in the picture. Jamie lifted his head, his eyes searching Elliot's. Good. Because I'm not going anywhere. They kissed then, slow and tentative, like they were learning each other all over again. It wasn't perfect, it was messy, a little awkward, full of the nervous energy of two people stepping into something new. But it was theirs, and that was enough. As the night deepened, they talked about the future, not grand plans, but small, real things. Moving in together. Maybe. Traveling somewhere warm when Chicago's winter got too brutal. Building a life that wasn't a performance, but a truth they could both live in. Elliot fell asleep on Jamie's couch, his hand tangled in Jamie's. And for the first time in years, he felt like he was exactly where he was supposed to be. Winter settled over Chicago, blanketing the city in snow and quiet. Elliot and Jamie's new reality took shape slowly, built on late-night talks, shared meals, and moments of courage that grew easier with time. They weren't perfect, they argued over dishes, got annoyed when one stole the blanket, but they were real. And that made all the difference. One evening, they returned to Maggie's Diner, the place where their story had begun. The neon sign still buzzed. The booths still creaked. But everything felt different now. They sat across from each other, hands intertwined on the table, unafraid of who might see. Think we'd still be here if it wasn't for that reunion? Jamie asked, stealing a fry from Elliot's plate. Elliot thought about it, his mind tracing the path from that rainy night to now. Maybe. But I'm glad we didn't wait to find out. Jamie smiled, his eyes warm. Me too. They talked about the future, about telling their families, about navigating a world that wasn't always kind to people like them. It wouldn't be easy, but they'd face it together, the way they always had. The reunion, the act, the pretense side had been a spark, but what they had now was a fire, steady and strong. As they stepped outside, the snow falling soft and silent, Elliot took Jamie's hand. The city stretched before them, vast and alive. And for the first time, Elliot didn't feel like he was running from anything. He was running toward something, toward Jamie, toward himself, toward a life they'd build together, one brave step at a time. And in that moment, under the glow of the diner's neon sign, Elliot knew they'd be okay. Not because it was perfect, but because it was theirs.